So on our call last week, you said something that really stayed with me, that the challenge ahead is no longer efficiency, it's differentiation and distinctiveness. At a moment where brands can produce infinite content faster than ever, do you think companies realize they're slowly becoming interchangeable, or do most still mistake visibility for memorability?
Well, there's a term of art out there that's called blanding. Have you heard that before?
Blanding?
Blanding, blanding. And what blanding is, it suggests there's this drive for all companies to start looking alike and acting alike. And if you look at the evolution of, of logos recently, a lot of the logos, they've suddenly become these, no edges, no sharp points. They're all kind of seamless circles and whatever else. So using very similar color palettes. And all of that is what they're now calling, a lot of the design community is calling blanding, the blanding of the world. There are a couple of different ways to attack the problem you're talking about. First of all, let's go back and say, what's the difference between difference and distinctiveness? And really, the best way to look at that is to be different is to, in fact, have a point of difference, something that doesn't distinguish, makes you unique within your competitive set. So a toilet paper Charmin is different than a toilet paper Kimberly Clark for whatever reason they choose. That's their point of difference. Distinctiveness is how they present themselves in a way that makes them memorable and unique. So if difference is about what is the truth of the brand that makes you different, then distinctiveness is what do you do to look and appear and become more memorable and unique. You think about how that really works in the creative process, and then you integrate something like AI, which is building its conclusions. It's making its conclusions based upon past data. So it's saying, okay, I'm gonna, AI is going to make a decision based upon what's gotten the most likes or clicks or whatever metric it's using to come to its. And so it's using all that, and it says, okay, I'm going to basically replicate that with my go forward messaging, my design, my copy, everything else. And so I think you have AI now contributing to this notion of blanding, because when we're trapped in the past, when we're just replicating what's been done, even if it's the most successful that has been done before, all we're doing is repeating history. We're not making new history.
Oh my God, that's such a sharp way to put it. And in your writing, you talk a lot about how audiences are far more perceptive than brands distribute, which I couldn't agree more. And that people can feel when work has been diluted and rushed or created without conviction. Do you think consumers subconsciously experience like low quality creative as a signal that the brand itself no longer cares?
Well, that's the essence of a huge debate that's going on right now, and I'm sure you're seeing it as well. There's a very, very excellent technology blogger, professor named Shelley Palmer, and he's made the argument that if the audience doesn't notice a difference, is there really a difference? So if we in the professionals in the community see the Coca-Cola and holiday spot remade with AI, and we say, but the angles are off and the eyes look dead and there's too many fingers, but the consumer doesn't notice it, is it really important? And my answer is yes, because I don't think that people respond simply to noticeable cues that are something they can identify. I think they respond to other things, and that's particularly true with a category like AI, which is so distrusted in so many ways. So if people start seeing those cues, registering them, either, if not consciously, then subconsciously, it will contribute to their lack of trust. And particularly when they find out that, yes, that Coca-Cola commercial was made with AI, it was not made with real people. And that makes them trust the technology and trust the brand even less. So, and I think if you go to the System 1 data, so they're taking a look at this stuff as well in a hard way. They're kind of giving us the first good hard data about what really works in advertising and marketing and what doesn't. It turns out that it's about emotion and emotional resonance and impact. You'll find that there's a lot of evidence out there that's accumulating that people, even if they don't consciously register it as artificial or synthetic, they actually feel it, and that interferes with their perceptions of the brand.
Oh, I love that. And You have also mentioned something really interesting about AI pulling from historical patterns and how creative risk becoming enthralled to what's been done before. And so I'm curious, if the industry keeps optimizing towards what has historically performed well, do you think we risk entering a creative era where like surprise, weirdness, genuine cultural leaps start disappearing?
Well, I mean, I think we run the risk of the advertising industry becoming Hollywood. Where everybody winds up doing sequels, of prequels, of serials, of repetition. And I think that's really the case. I'll tell you. Well, here's an interesting thing. If you ask AI about this, which I did, AI will tell you that the technology that predictive technology based upon an existing data set is not likely to come up with a creative leap of the sort of the most famous advertising in history. They said, AI will say it can do a lot of good things well, but it will tell you it is not going to come up with, for example, if you remember, well before both you and I were born, the VW lemon ad, right, which was absolutely game changing for the industry. Actually, not that far before I was born, but anyway, we won't go there. But the point of that is if I'm building off existing data to create the next data set, and that becomes my universe. Where's the new idea? As you say, where's the surprise going to come from?
Yeah.
Haven't seen that before. And an interesting conundrum. And I think probably the biggest ray of hope for the creative arts generally will be a growing recognition that AI can do certain things very well, but if you really want to get it to kick it up to the next level where we're really creating history instead of replicating it, you need human contributions.
Absolutely. And one thing I know across your record is that you're not technology at all. Like, you seem deeply protective of originality and judgment and craft. So I'm curious, where do you personally draw the line between technology expanding creativity versus like quietly flattening it?
Well, I think we talked about. I wrote a blog article called "Source Agnostic," and the idea of being source agnostic. And I'm speaking as when I do directing, I have this attitude: is we no longer should be worrying about what the source of a creative asset is or a creative execution is. Live action, CG, VFX, animation, and of course AI are all viable tools to
Yeah.
get to the result. That's all fair game, and I think increasingly people should be saying, how do I deploy this technology, whatever it may be, to the best advantage? I don't need to. I mean, I don't need to have a big feature film level crew out. In many cases, now I can do it more efficiently. But there are cases where I'm
Mhm.
going to want to do that big feature film crew and have all the bells and whistles and do it in camera and make it more wonderful than you can do in an animation context. But being source agnostic does not say that you are idea agnostic.
Yeah.
And and if you think about ideas, what is an idea? An idea is in the context of which it is offered. So a big advertising idea is something that really is something new and fresh in advertising. Like, a big
Yeah.
idea in physics is a new idea. It's E equals MC squared, something we haven't seen before. And that's what we have to protect is the novelty and the value of the idea, not we don't have to sit and be protective about how it's executed. That's counterproductive, and good luck with that as the Titanic sinks below the waves.
So you wrote recently that for most of your career, it took just as much effort to make mediocre work as it did to make something great. Because the process itself is fundamentally the same. But now AI has removed so much friction that brands can produce good enough work endlessly and cheaply. So do you think the disappearance of creative struggle is part of what's quietly eroding the emotional value of modern advertising?
Well, I mean, this circles back to the question you raised at the very beginning. Is hold on for just a second. Hang on, somebody's at the door. And how irritating. Um, Hold on, let's just see. Let me make sure that this isn't going to be a long conversation. False door. We have a live work here in New York, so that's what you're seeing. Anyway, would you repeat the question?
Yeah. So, like, do you think the disappearance of creative struggle is part of what's quietly eroding value.
I think you've got to take that in a couple from a couple of directions. One of which is are the standards slipping? I mean, it's so starting in 2009. If the guy I believe has the history right, the advertising industry, creative industry went all in on digital. We all said everything's digital. We're gonna basically put all of that into the world of screens and the world of interconnectivity, and we're going to work on the metrics that are attached to digital and all that other stuff. And that were created because in particularly in the clients' minds, people said, "Oh, digital's free and it's easy. I can just put stuff out there and put it on Facebook, and I've done my job." And so it created this gigantic content maw. And you see a lot of people who are basically their whole philosophy is just be always on 24/7. I'm always in front of people. I'm always shouting for attention. That didn't necessarily do any good, as it turns out. Michael Farmer, is the guy I was referring to, who has done some studies on this, says if you look at 30 of the top 50 brands who all made this decision to go all in on digital, they haven't seen measurable brand growth since that 2009 period when everybody went in all in on digital. And the reason why, I think, is they started slipping, their standards started slipping. They started saying, we're going to be out, we're going to speak when we have something to say, and that something has to be worthwhile and interesting and worth the audience's time and attention. And I think that has become that's part of the debate. Now it goes back to what we said, is if the audience doesn't notice a single piece of creative is lame, does it matter? Or flawed, but not lame, but flawed, does it matter? And the answer is, yeah, I think it does, because as we put out more volume, I mean, not only for my own brand, not only for my own creative project, but for the overall, we're creating more clutter, we're creating more noise, we're making it harder for signals to penetrate, and we're creating an environment in which the industry becomes less and less effective. And that is
Yeah.
ultimately what we're in the business to be, is effective. And I don't care whether that's a Hollywood movie that's effective in entertaining its audience or a brand effective in growing its market share. It's still all about the impact of the work you do out there in the world.
Oof, that's such an important point. And your mention piece, it's fully accurate. It describes an industry flooding people with more and more content while simultaneously exhausting the very attention it depends on. Do you think modern marketing has become too focused on proving activity like clicks, engagement, output, instead of creating work that leaves an emotional residue?
Yeah, and that's not speculation either. The System 1 data, and you take a look at both that and the Aaron Rick Bass work, there's been a lot of work done now that shows that there's an enormous cost to being dull and to being uninteresting and just being present. And I don't have the numbers in front, but I do seem to recall that essentially an ad that has emotional resonance is something on the order of 6 times more effective. The numbers might be wrong, but you can look it up on system1.com. There was somewhere on the order of 6 times more effective because it had emotional resonance and it appealed to the audience, not just in a bland and dull way. And I think this is the first time, by the way, we've had that kind of data. And that throws up a big question for the world. I mean, we're creating a test of brand character, and the test is: do I aim for great or don't I aim for great? Do I settle for mediocre? What does that say about the brand? What does that say about brand management? What does that say about brand leadership when the company is willing to settle for great? Long time ago, one of my very first assignments, I sat in a meeting, and I have no reason why I was invited to this meeting, but it was a big packaged goods company, and everybody in the room was a senior vice president or above at this big, well, at least I think the most junior was director of marketing for this and that. And the EVP, the executive vice president, stands up and says, here at so and so company, name redacted to protect the guilty. We don't want to be the leading edge of the leading edge. We'd rather be the trailing edge of the leading edge. And I always thought that was indicative of the character of that company. They didn't want to actually pioneer anything new. They didn't want to necessarily they wanted somebody to take all the risk and then come up and basically settle for the smaller rewards that come with just being mediocre. And I think a lot of the world is that way these days. I think a lot of brands are settling for mediocre because they're focusing on the wrong metrics, or they're focusing on the politics of their own organization, or they're just focusing on staying alive and staying afloat.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you bring that. And you across politics, healthcare, entertainment, worlds where storytelling carries different emotional states. I'm curious, which environment has there been an environment that taught you the most about the difference between communication that captures attention briefly versus communication that genuinely changes how people feel?
Well, I don't think that's true from a category. I don't think there's a category that or an environment where you find that more to be true. I think it is a look in life. You got to stay curious and you got to stay alert and you got to kind of keep your eyes open, your ears open, and see what and not just this is Sherlock Holmes who said to Watson, you observe but you do not see. And I think we have to see, and I think we also to have to do more than listen. We have to hear and those
Listen.
yeah, and from all that I think we get a better sense of what is happening. What are those core human insights is an overused word, those core human events and motivations that bring us closer to how can we be persuasive, how can we resonate with what we say with people. And it's not easy. I mean, I don't think I don't think a category teaches you that so much as just time on track and being curious going through that time, as you're learning, as you're experimenting, you're trying.
Yeah. There's such power in being curious.
Right. Well,
You know?
if you're not curious, you're headblind, right? Because you've already made up your mind. I mean, half the problem we have in our society right now of polarization and inability. This is the political world. Is that people stop being curious, and what instead they wanted was confirmation. That their biases are correct. It's called confirmation bias, and that's, I think, a huge problem. I think it's a fatal problem for the advertising industry because, I mean, particularly as we try and keep the industry viable in the face of platform domination at the top level.
Yeah, that's a really important now. You know? And if someone watched this conversation 20 years, what do you think people will say this era misunderstood most about creativity? Like, in other words, what are we in danger of sacrificing right now in the name of speed and automation and scale that future generations might see as incredibly valuable?
Well, I have a basic answer to that and an aspirational answer to that. The basic answer to that is I think people will conclude that we were too fast to grab for the shiny new object on the merry-go-round, right? That somehow we confused the speed at which technology evolves with the speed at which humanity evolves. And it doesn't work. I mean, a lot of the neurobiological instincts we are hardwired into us, and it's going to take evolution to change that. And I don't care how much technology you put into the mix. So we will lose a sense that we missed the forest we missed the trees and the bark and the interesting things living on the trees and the bark for this sense of the forest, right? The aspirational things, I think at some point humanity prevails, and our sense of humanity prevails, and at some point people are going to say, yeah, it really is important that what I say has to be worthwhile and important and useful. And I'm going to stop looking at the latest technology as a radical, this changes everything, and start looking at technology in the context of the flow of history, the rhyme of history, if you will.
Well, Jeff, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time to share.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to Fully Managed, brought to you by Penji. Check out the show notes to learn more about today's guest, and to learn more about Penji, the human-first creative subscription service, head over to penji.co. And by the way, if you're still listening, it would mean the absolute world to us if you were to share this podcast with a friend, and of course, subscribe.